Everyone in the circles I ran and knew the drill. I was a gold digger, pure and simple. Marrying Burrell Vance was all about the money. He saw me as a placeholder, a stand-in for someone else. I saw him as a human ATM. Then, his beloved stepsister, the original white moonlight he'd been pining for, returned home. The one who was supposed to gracefully step aside, suddenly found myself a little reluctant. I mean, a handsome, generous sugar daddy like Burrell wasn't exactly easy to come by. Just as I was racking my brain, trying to figure out how to cling on for dear life, I stumbled upon Burrell prying a gem from my mother's ring, her only memento, just to make Amelia happy. Burrell caught my stunned expression and, with an impatient sigh, pulled out his checkbook. "Name your price," he said, "I'll double it." His cold, indifferent gaze snapped me back to reality. My heart, a fleeting moment ago, had fluttered with something soft and useless. Now it hardened. Forget sentiment. Maya, go for the gold, the real, tangible kind. I immediately looked up, a sweet, innocent smile plastered on my face. Triple, I asked. Would triple work? Burrell froze then, as if he'd expected this all along. He scoffed and shook his head. His pen moved decisively across the checkbook, scribbling a longer number before tearing off the slip with a sharp rip. He held it out to me. 5 million. That old ring of yours was barely worth 50,000. I'm giving you 10 times that. Enough. The check was covered in a dizzying array of zeros, more than I'd ever seen outside of a bank statement. My eyes crinkled into crescent moons as I took it. Enough, more than enough. Seeing my delighted expression, Amelia, who was still clutching the freshly pried jam, felt a surge of indignation. This whole show had been orchestrated to torment me. She deliberately praised the stone in my dressing table ring. Competent Burrell would remove it for her. She'd envisioned me walking in, collapsing like a hysterical shrew, giving her the perfect opportunity to play the fragile victim, making Burrell despise me even more, maybe even kick me out. But Amelia hadn't anticipated I'd be so easily placated. She couldn't help but raise her voice, accusing me. "Maya Brooks, are you really that materialistic? Cook said that ring was your mother's only keepsake. You're so heartless towards your own parents. How much sincerity could you possibly have for Burrell? As for this worthless rock, here, take it back. I wouldn't touch something from someone like you. It's soiled." The gem bounced off my foot, rolling a few times on the floor, picking up tiny scratches. Burrell glanced at Amelia's aggressive outburst, a faint, almost imperceptible frown creasing his brow. Instead of getting angry, I simply bent down and picked it up, blowing off the dust. Then I spoke calmly. "Miss Burrell, there's something Cook might not have told you. My mother was a human trafficker. The first child she ever sold was me. Later, when she saw I'd made something of myself, she wanted to reclaim me. So she eagerly spent a fortune on this ring, saying it was a gift to win me back. I refused, and then I reported her to the police. She was sentenced and died years ago." I slipped the gem into my pocket, flashing Amelia a dazzling smile. "So, exchanging this trinket for 5 million? Absolute steal. But since you don't like it, Miss Burrell, I guess I'm just getting a freebie, huh?" "Thank you, Miss Burrell." Amelia gasped, a lump of frustration stuck in her throat. I, on the other hand, was thrilled to see her squirm. Adopting the air of the lady of the house, I continued to needle her. "Miss Burrell, you've just returned from a long journey. The maid has prepared the guest room. You should get some rest." Then, I turned my gaze to Burrell, a suggestive glint in my eyes, my voice dripping with honey. "Well, darling, I'll head back to my room then. I'll be waiting for you in the master suite." As I turned, I could almost hear Amelia grinding her teeth behind me.
Sigh.
"I'm a professional gold digger. Don't challenge my livelihood with your little games." Back in the master suite, the mangled ring setting Burrell had damaged lay on the dresser. I casually pulled the gem from my pocket and set it beside it. With a soft sigh, I found a tube of superglue and tried to reattach it. My birth mother had sold me to a couple who couldn't have children. 40,000, but because I was a girl, she haggled down to 30,000 and sold me cheap. I was 6, old enough to remember, old enough to work. Ironically, that couple had a son. A few years later, my adoptive parents in turn sold me again 23,600 to an old drunk who said he'd raise me to be his wife. Less than 2 years later, the drunk drowned after a binge. Finally, I was no longer being trafficked around like cheap goods. I struggled to grow up. My birth mother sold me for money. My adoptive parents sold me for money. So don't call me materialistic. Maybe I never knew what love felt like growing up. I've lived this long, never having time to fret over love. Money, though, was a constant worry. All that love nonsense? 2 days of work, and you'll be over it. Luckily, I loved money, and money loved me. My mind was wandering through these chaotic memories when Burrell's voice suddenly broke through. I'm sorry. I didn't know. That was your mother's keepsake. I turned, shaking my head, a professional smile on my face. It's fine. You compensated me, didn't you? Such a huge sum. I don't even know how many rings I could buy with it. Burrell glanced at me holding the glue, clearly not comforted. He simply thought I was putting on a brave face. He lowered his eyes, his expression complex for a moment. Seeing his silence, I paused, then picked up my phone. Oh, right. There was something I needed to tell you. Before I could finish, Amelia's panicked shriek suddenly echoed from the guest room down the hallway. Burrell, quickly. Burrell's face tightened instantly. Without a moment's hesitation, he turned and dashed out. My hand, holding out the phone, froze midair. The screen glowed with an electronic prenatal checkup form. Early pregnancy. 6 weeks plus. I watched Burrell's hasty retreat, the screen dimming, my smile fading with it. That night, Burrell didn't return to the master suite. See? Money really is the most reliable thing. Sleep wouldn't come. I spent the entire night gluing the ring back together with that cheap tube of adhesive. It wasn't until the morning sun slanted across my dressing table that I finally stopped. It had a rough outline again, but the cracks crisscrossed, like an ugly face streaked with tears. I picked it up, held it to the light. It really was time to throw it away. With a sigh, I dropped it into the wastebasket by the table. I stood up, ready to leave, but then turned back, gave a self-deprecating smile, and reached into the trash to retrieve the valuable gem. Never mind. I can argue with anyone, but not with money. A quick glance at the time told me Burrell was likely at the office. I decided to get ready and head out to cash the check. With Amelia back, I needed to be prepared for being shown the door at any moment. Passing the dining room on the first floor, my footsteps drew Amelia's attention. She immediately set down her cutlery. Morning, Maya, she drawled, a mocking edge in her voice. You look terrible. Didn't sleep well without Burrell around? She stretched out the last words, deliberately adjusting the collar of her silk robe, revealing a few fresh, telltale hickeys on her collarbone. Once she saw I'd definitely noticed, she continued, smugly. I'm sorry. Whenever I used to fly long haul, and my jet lag was terrible, Burrell always stayed with me, helped me adjust. You don't mind, do you? After all, Burrell and I have a bond that goes back to childhood. You can't compare. I took a deep breath. A sharp, stinging pain pricked my heart, but it was okay. I'd always been good at enduring pain, ever since I was a child. I tilted my head, calmly reminding Amelia, oh, but Burrell and I are getting married at the end of the month. We're officially tying the knot early next month. That sentence instantly hit a nerve. Amelia shot up from her chair, yelling at me, What are you so smug about? If his mother hadn't opposed it so vehemently back then, we would have been together already. I wouldn't have been forced to go abroad. Now that I'm back, do you honestly think you can stay by Burrell's side? Watching her frantic outburst, I merely raised an eyebrow, mechanically repeating, Oh, but Burrell and I are getting married at the end of the month. We're officially tying the knot early next month. Amelia was trembling with rage, screaming hysterically, Bitch, still dreaming about a wedding? I'm telling you, you'll never marry Burrell. I'll make sure you're out of the Vance mansion for good. I didn't blink. I just watched her, wondering how someone with such high-end skincare could have such a low-end temperament. Are you done? I asked, my voice as smooth as the silk robe she was using to brag about her night with my husband. Because I have a $5 million check to cash and the bank closes at 4. Amelia's eyes bulged. She grabbed a crystal juice carafe from the table and hurled it at me. I stepped aside. Years of dodging drunk adoptive fathers made my reflexes elite, and watched the expensive glass shatter against the wall. 5 million, she shrieked. You're nothing but a parasite. Burrell will see you for what you are. He already does, I replied, smoothing my hair. He sees a woman who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And honestly, after living with his mother and now you, a cold transaction is probably a relief to him. I walked out the door, the sound of her frustrated wailing fading behind me. But as I sat in the back of a taxi, my hand instinctively drifted to my stomach. 6 weeks. In this world, children were either born into gold or sold for it. I knew which one I wanted for this baby, and it didn't involve the Vance family drama. At the bank, I sat in the private VIP lounge. The manager, a man who usually bowed low enough to see his own shoes when he saw the Vance name, looked at the check. Then he looked at me. His expression was hesitant. Is there a problem? I asked, a cold pit forming in my stomach. Ms. Brooks, I'm afraid this check has been flagged. The account holder, Mr. Vance, issued a stop payment order 30 minutes ago. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I stared at the slip of paper. 5 million. A moment ago, it was my ticket to freedom. Now, it was just a piece of trash with a billionaire's signature. I didn't cry. I didn't even frown. I simply took the check back, folded it neatly, and placed it in my purse. I see. Thank you for your time. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun. Burrell had taken the gem, taken my dignity, and now he'd taken the compensation. He wanted to play for keeps. Fine. I called Burrell. He answered on the third ring.
Maya.
I'm busy. You stopped the check, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Amelia told me you threatened her this morning, he said, his tone like ice. She said you told her you'd only leave if I gave you 50 million. I don't like being extorted, Maya. I gave you 5 million as a gesture of goodwill for the ring. If you want to be greedy, you get nothing. I let out a soft, dry laugh. She's good, Burrell. Really good. But tell me, did she also tell you why I was at the hospital yesterday? There was a beat of silence. The hospital? Never mind, I said, seeing his car pull into the drive of the Vance mansion ahead of me as my taxi arrived. I'm at the gates. Let's finish this in person. When I walked into the house, Amelia was draped over Burrell in the foyer, sobbing about how scared she was of my violent temper. Burrell looked up, his eyes dark with disappointment. Maya, pack your things, he said. The wedding is off. I'll have my lawyers send you a settlement, a reasonable one, once you've moved out. I didn't move. I looked at Amelia, then at Burrell. I pulled the electronic checkup form out of my bag, not the one on my phone, but a hard copy I'd printed. I also pulled out a small, cheap recording device I'd tucked into my pocket before leaving this morning. I pressed play. Amelia's voice filled the room. Bitch, still dreaming about a wedding? I'm telling you, you'll never marry Burrell. I'll make sure you're out of the Vance mansion for good. I'll tell him you tried to blackmail me. He'll believe me. He always does. Amelia's face went from pale to a ghastly, sickly white. Burrell's grip on her waist loosened. He looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. Amelia, he whispered. She edited it. She's trying to frame me. Amelia scrambled, but the recording continued, capturing the sound of the carafe shattering and her vile insults. I stepped forward and handed Burrell the hospital form. I was going to tell you last night, but you were too busy helping her adjust to her jet lag. Burrell's eyes scanned the paper. Early pregnancy. 6 weeks. The silence was deafening. He looked at the form, then at the recording device, then at the woman he'd idolized as his white moonlight. You lied, Burrell said to Amelia, his voice trembling with a suppressed rage. You told me she threatened you. You told me she hated the baby we talked about having one day. Burrell, honey, I did it for us. Amelia cried, reaching for him. She's just a gold digger. She doesn't love the baby. She only loves the child support. I walked over to the wastebasket where I'd thrown the ring setting. I picked it up, the ugly, glue-stained piece of scrap metal. I walked to Burrell and pressed it into his hand, right on top of the pregnancy test. "You're right, Amelia," I said, smiling through the stinging pain in my chest. "I am a gold digger, and I've realized there's no gold left in this house. Just lead." I turned to Burrell. "Keep the 5 million. Keep the house. Keep the moonlight. I've spent my whole life being sold by people who were supposed to love me. I'm not going to let my child be the next item on your ledger." "Maya, wait," Burrell gasped, finally dropping Amelia's hand. "We can talk about this. The check. I'll reissue it. I don't want her money, Burrell," I said, and for the first time in my life, it was the truth. "I want to be the one person in my family tree who isn't for sale." I walked upstairs, packed a single suitcase with the clothes I'd bought with my own salary from my part-time job, and walked back down. Burrell was standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking broken. Amelia was huddled in a corner, realizing her triumph had turned into a permanent exile. As I reached the door, I paused. "By the way, Burrell, that gem? It's a high-quality lab-grown spinel. My mother was a trafficker, but she wasn't a fool. She'd never spend real money on a gift for a daughter she didn't want. You pried a $50 rock out of a dead woman's ring just to please a liar." I blew him a kiss, the professional, polished kind, and walked out into the rain. I moved into a small, clean apartment in a part of the city where the name Vance meant nothing. I worked 2 jobs, my belly growing, my heart finally finding a steady, quiet rhythm. 6 months later, I received a package. It was a box from a high-end jeweler. Inside was the ring setting, perfectly restored by a master craftsman. The fake gem was gone, replaced by a flawless, pigeon-blood ruby worth more than the $5 million check he'd canceled. There was a note. "I spent 6 months looking for a stone that was real enough for you. I realized there isn't one. Amelia is gone. My mother is furious. And I am alone in a mansion that feels like a tomb. Please, let me be a father. Not a sugar daddy, just a father." I looked at the ruby, sparkling in the light of my modest kitchen. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. "Maya?" Burrell's voice was breathless, hopeful. "The ruby is beautiful, Burrell," I said, watching my reflection in the window, tired but free. "But I think I prefer the superglue. It reminds me that things can be broken and still hold together." "Can I see you?" he pleaded. "You can see your daughter in 3 months," I said. "But bring your checkbook. Not for me, for her college fund. Because in this family, we don't sell our children. We invest in them." I hung up, a genuine, soft smile finally reaching my eyes. The gold digger had finally found the one thing worth more than a billion zeros, a life that was finally, truly, her own. 3 months later, the air in the private maternity ward was thick with the scent of lilies and antiseptic. I was exhausted, my body feeling like it had been through a war, but in my arms was the only thing I'd ever owned that didn't have a price tag. A daughter. The door creaked open. Burrell stood there, looking like a man who had forgotten how to sleep. He wasn't wearing his usual $10,000 tailored suit. He was in a simple sweater, his eyes instantly locking onto the small bundle in my arms. He hesitated at the foot of the bed, holding a small, worn teddy bear instead of a diamond-encrusted rattle. "She's perfect, Maya," he whispered, his voice thick with a vulnerability I'd never heard. "She is," I said, tiredly shifting. "And she's expensive. I hope you brought that college fund agreement." Burrell pulled a chair close to the bed, but he didn't reach for his checkbook. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. "Maya, please," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I spent my life thinking everything could be settled with a signature. I thought I could buy your forgiveness for what I did with the ring, for believing Amelia, but sitting in that house alone, I realized the only thing I couldn't buy was the way you looked at me before I broke your heart." "You didn't break my heart, Burrell," I said, looking down at our daughter. "You just reminded me that hearts are a luxury. I grew up in survival mode. Survival doesn't require a heart. It requires a plan. My plan is to raise her to be so strong that no man can ever think he owns her just because he has a larger bank balance." Burrell looked at the ruby ring sitting on my bedside table, the one I still refused to wear. I want to be in her life. And I want to be in yours. Not as a placeholder. As a partner. Partnership requires trust, I replied. And trust is the one thing you can't triple the price on. I'll wait, he said, his jaw setting with a newfound resolve. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll be the father she deserves and the man you can actually respect. The Maya Brooks Agency didn't deal in gold or gems. It was a consulting firm for women entering high-stakes pre-nuptial negotiations, a shield for the sold, as the tabloids called it. I used every trick I'd learned as a gold digger to ensure that women walked into marriages with their eyes open and their exits secured. I was finishing a meeting in my sleek, midtown office when my assistant buzzed. Ms. Brooks, your 4 p.m. is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says he has the quarterly dividend for the trust. I smiled. Send him in. Burrell walked in, carrying our 1-year-old daughter, Lily. She was wearing a tiny denim jacket and had a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. Burrell looked comfortable, truly comfortable, for the first time in his life. He wasn't the cold ATM anymore. He was a man who knew how to change a diaper in the back of a moving car. The trust is flourishing, Burrell said, setting Lily down. She immediately wobbled over to my desk, reaching for a stapler. And the house in the Hamptons is finished. It's in Lily's name, with you as the sole trustee. No Vance strings attached. I stood up, picking up my daughter and kissing her forehead. Good. I'll have my lawyers look over the deeds. Burrell lingered near the door. We're having dinner tonight. At that little diner you like. No private chefs, no paparazzi. Just us. I looked at him. At the man who had spent a year proving that he could be more than his money. He had fought his mother's influence, stayed away from Amelia's desperate re-entry attempts, and had shown up at every doctor's appointment and milestone, even when I told him he didn't have to. I have a lot of work, Burrell, I said, though my tone was softer. The work will be there tomorrow, Maya, he said, stepping closer. But the sunset won't. And Lily really wants to see you eat a grilled cheese sandwich. I laughed, a real, light sound that didn't feel like a professional mask. I reached into my drawer and pulled out the old, mangled ring, the one I'd glued back together myself. It wasn't beautiful, and it wasn't worth $5 million. But it was a reminder of where I'd come from. I slipped it onto my pinky finger. Fine, I said. But you're paying. And no tipping the waitress $500 just because she smiled at you. Keep it reasonable. Burrell grinned, the cold billionaire finally replaced by a man who knew the true value of a moment. Reasonable. I can do that. As we walked out of the office together, I realized that I hadn't just struck gold. I had finally found the one thing a girl like me was never supposed to have, a future that wasn't for sale.